Back in the mid-2010s, Blade & Soul was one of the most anticipated MMOs on the market. It was talked about on every major MMO forum all across social media. There were Reddit threads detailing how to obtain access to and play the Korean version of the game, as we had no definitive global release window. And in the span of a mere few years, that hope, that longing, dispersed amongst a sea of bad decisions from NCSoft, which is really no surprise to anyone. They ruined Lineage, Ion, Wildstar. Why not ruin Blade & Soul as well, right? Over the last several years, we've seen Blade & Soul, an MMO with arguably some of the best action combat in the genre, a beautiful graphical style, enormous world, decent narrative, just fall into obscurity. No matter how good the core game was, nobody wanted to play it. NCSoft were well aware of this, how could they not be? And in the vein of WoW Classic, Ion Classic, the Tower of Fantasy Classic reboot, and every other major classic incarnation of an older MMO struggling to remain relevant, NCSoft announced on November 28, 2024 that they were going to be releasing Blade & Soul Neo Classic. This is not a traditional classic rendition of the game, rather an upgraded classic version with graphical updates, altered content, and more. With this in mind, is it something we're interested in? Is it something that will create a sufficient enough alteration to the game to warrant a return of player interest? Or is it going to be more of the same NCSoft BS? Let's find out. Although I'm going to be completely honest here, I feel like the majority of us already know. Before we delve into Neo Classic, however, I want to take a moment here to thank my incredible patrons over on Patreon, who allow for me to continue to do content like this every single week. You guys are irreplaceable, and I cannot thank you all enough for the support. Now let's talk Blade & Soul. On November 28, 2023, NCSoft revealed Blade & Soul Neo Classic to the world. They have a website dedicated to it, although for some reason have no content published on it. If you scroll down, you'll see they note, new battles and content will introduce unique ways to transcend through the game. Accompanying the website was an announcement teaser, which showed us some familiar areas rendered in Unreal Engine 4, rather than Unreal Engine 3, which the game was originally built in. On December 7th, 2023, a blog post was made over on the official Blade & Soul website, not the Neo Classic website, titled Introducing Blade & Soul Neo Classic. According to the devs, there has been an overwhelming amount of interest and support for Neo, and I mean, you know what, that very well might be true, but there are what, like a couple thousand people left playing the game at this juncture? Scrolling down a little, we see a combat preview and dungeon preview for Neo, both of which genuinely looked good. On December 15, 2023, a blog post was made over on the Blade & Soul website, once again, not the Neo Classic website, titled The Art of Neo's Viridian Coast. It's worth noting that no blog posts or news posts were made on the Neo Classic website, only the original. They went on to address the original conversion from Unreal Engine 3 to Unreal Engine 4, and how drastically the game changed style, being a regret for both them and their players. Their goal this time was to remedy that, replicating the original vibrant, colorful aesthetic that the game had. A video for the Viridian Coast was provided, including some images showcasing comparisons, which honestly look fantastic in Neo, especially when compared to the live server. On January 3rd, 2024, NCSoft made a blog post titled The Art of Neo's Moonwater Plains. In this update, they go on to discuss their goal of providing a richer, more dynamic landscape, adding foliage interactions with grass and flowers that respond to players' movements so that the world feels like a dynamic space that interacts with your character rather than just existing as a background. And while beautiful, both in the teaser video and the images supplied, I'm still waiting for them to address the actual issues players have with the game, because being pretty was not one of them. But we do have a few additional blog posts to read through. On January 5th, 2024, a blog post was made titled Neo's Mushin Tower Guide. As always, a teaser accompanied the blog post, along with a little bit of info that really felt relatively pointless, as it was aimed at displaying a few additional settings when running the dungeon. But I mean, hey, you know what? It still looks cool. On January 18th, 2024, we received a blog post titled The Art of Neo's Cinderlands Part 1. I think the Cinderlands was probably the first time you really obtained a sense of scale in terms of the world. It felt absolutely enormous and took an exorbitant amount of time to traverse. Plus, Pinchy. Screw that guy. We had a new teaser to watch, some new screenshots to look at, but otherwise nothing noteworthy was mentioned. On January 24, 2024, a follow-up blog post, part 2, was released. In the follow-up, they went on to further address the graphical changes made to boss, monsters, and abilities. The new textures look great. I don't think anyone at all is contesting that, but with the single blog post left, absolutely nothing has been said of the major issues the game actually has. January 26th blog post titled Developing Neoclassic Part 2 elaborated a little bit on the game. In the blog post, they expressed their goal of not wanting players to return simply for nostalgia's sake, then leave again after playing the game for a couple months, which is true. They need a return on their investment after all, and they could hardly obtain that return if players leave too quickly. Interestingly, they do go on to state, we aim to recreate the classic Blade & Soul cleansed of all past disappointments, of which there are numerous. This also means that they're aware the game is a catastrophic disappointment to players in its current form, and that they're going to have to work very hard to produce something worthwhile. There are a few other points mentioned: conforming the combat sensibilities that players miss, improving the hit effects, adding jewel effects, again mostly cosmetic, graphical, something most of us had absolutely no issue with, but also on improving balance, combat, the economy, and much more. No mention of real content outside of run your dailies to get gold and upgrade materials, progression, the heavy instances of pay-to-win performance because it's still shit. There are a lot of things wrong with Blade & Soul, but graphics were definitely not one of them. I'm well aware that they're working on reworking numerous systems, but their focus seems to be on how pretty they can make Neoclassic look, which is not where their focus should be at all. The game looked fine, still better than half the MMOs that release these days, but this is NCSoft after all. When are they ever not disconnected from their player base and what their players actively want? I think Neoclassic could be a lot of fun whenever it inevitably releases, but at the same time, NCSoft have repeatedly shown how incompetent they are when it comes to either developing or publishing games, so I really don't have my expectations very high. I am genuinely curious to see what they do with Neoclassic, given what they did to Ion Classic, and seeing as Ion 2 is releasing in 2024, maybe 2025. Now, if Blade & Soul Neoclassic isn't an MMO you're at all interested in, no problem. I got you covered with 2 different videos on screen right now that might be more your style.